Great. Looks like we've got folks trickling in, and it is 5:30 on the nose, so we do want to be respectful of everyone's time, and we will get started. I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. My name is Noah Painter. I am one of the project consultants managing the outreach for the Sacramento River Parkway Project. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we jump into the presentation. We do understand that there are some strong opinions about the project, both in support and in opposition. We ask everybody to remain respectful of staff, presenters, and fellow attendees this evening. Tonight's meeting is going to be conducted via a Zoom webinar format. This format's designed to ensure that all participants have the opportunity to hear the information clearly. Please submit your questions via the Q&A feature. The Q&A feature is a function there, and you can ask your questions throughout the presentation. What we will do is at the end of the presentation, we will go through the Q&A and answer as many of the Q&A questions that we have. And if we're unable to answer your question this evening because either we run out of time, and I don't think that will happen, I think we'll be able to get to all your questions this evening, or it could be a possibility that we may not have a good answer for your question this evening. We'll follow up with you via email or phone, however you were able to register for the webinar this evening. In addition to that, this meeting is being recorded, and we will post a copy of this to our project webpage. And our project webpage is very simple. It's sacriverparkway.org. You'll see that a few times through this presentation. And just so everyone understands, there is a Q&A function, and then there is a webinar chat. The webinar chat is a chat function for just general housekeeping. We ask that if there are project-specific questions, there is a Q&A feature on the webinar that you can utilize both on your phone and on a desktop. So without further ado, I'd like to do some introductions this evening of who you're going to be hearing from. First, we have Megan Johnson. Megan is the project engineer and project manager for the Sacramento River Parkway Project with the City of Sacramento's Department of Public Works. Megan's leading this effort on behalf of the city. James Pangburn is not with us this evening, but he is the engineering manager with Wood Rogers. Wood Rogers is the project engineering consultant that has been hired to manage this project. We have Tim Chamberlain, who is the consultant project manager, who is with us tonight. And if I can get this out of my mouth, my name is Noah Painter. I am the outreach coordinator. I work with KMP Strategies and have been working on this project since it started. And with that, I'm going to pass this over to Megan and have Megan kick this off.
Awesome. Thanks, Noah. So first, I just want to reiterate our thanks for making time in your evening to join us tonight. The purpose of this focus meeting is to give updates on the project, but in particular on the selection process for the neighborhood access ramp locations, as well as to give an update and overview of the draft safety plan. So tonight we're going to walk you through how that draft plan is structured and what information it includes. And you're welcome to give initial thoughts tonight, but we'll also be providing copies that you can access on our webpage, and you can review it in depth and follow up via email with any comments, feedbacks, or thoughts that you may have. So the intention will be to finalize that safety plan during the final design phase through ongoing coordination with the community and internal stakeholders. So the purpose of these focus meetings is to focus on these specific topics that have particular relevance to your neighborhoods, but there's also going to be a larger public meeting in June that will cover more topics. And so we encourage you to come join us again at that larger meeting. And of course, you're also welcome to email us at our project email address with any feedback or questions. Let's go next slide. All right, great. So I know that many of you are already pretty familiar with the project, but I'm going to give an overview for anyone who may be new to what we're doing and why. So first, just a note about trails in general. California is blessed with natural resources, and our rivers, beaches, and lakes have been enjoyed by residents and visitors alike since people first arrived here. Trails along our natural resources improve mental and physical health, they connect communities, and they provide recreational and mobility benefits. As California's population increased and urbanization and private development began to cut off these resources, a series of legislative acts were taken in the 1970s to ensure continued public access to our waterways. This included a voter initiative in 1972, which led to the creation of the California Coastal Commission and the Coastal Act, which famously preserved public access to the coast. And then State Assembly Bill 1504 required that new subdivision developments adjacent to waterways were to include a dedication for public access adjacent to the river or stream. This was incorporated into the Subdivision Map Act and added to state code. And since then, the notion of public access rights along the coast and waterways has become ingrained into Californian consciousness, despite the continued existence of some locations of private ownership. Next slide, please. So here's a bit of high-level background on the origins of the Pocket Greenhaven neighborhood and its development. As most of you are probably aware, the Pocket area was first settled by Portuguese immigrants in the 1850s as a rural farming community. The population in the Pocket started to increase when the Pocket was annexed into the city in 1959. The early residential developments, which followed in the 1960s, were largely on the north side of the Pocket and Greenhaven neighborhood. In the mid-70s, with the construction of Interstate 5 and a new connection of Pocket Road to Riverside Boulevard, there was more growth and an increase in development in the Pocket to the south. As mentioned, the Subdivision Map Act had gone into effect in the early 70s, which required developers to dedicate public access next to the river as part of the approvals process for those new subdivisions. So that was an overview of the development of the Pocket neighborhood. And then next slide is an overview of the development of the Sacramento River Parkway Trail Project. In the 70s, as new subdivision developments were including those dedications adjacent to the river for public access, the Sacramento River Parkway Master Plan established an official vision for a recreational trail that would connect Freeport in the south all the way up to the confluence with the American River near downtown. As the Pocket continued growing to the south, the Sacramento River Parkway Trail was then included in the Pocket Area Community Plan in 1979. Then not a lot happened for a while, until 1997, when an update of the plan accounted for changing land uses that had occurred since 1975, and it confirmed the vision for the Levee Top Trail and approved an environmental impact report. In 2012, City Council then adopted an implementation plan for the American and Sacramento River Parkway plans, which identified actions that would ultimately lead to a 25-mile interconnected river trail system. Next slide. So this shows a map from that 2012 implementation plan, and it shows the vision for that ultimate interconnected trail system along the two rivers. Along the Sacramento River, following the adoption of the master plan in 1975, the city's been chipping away at that vision. The completion of this project will create the largest stretch of continuous waterfront trail along the Sacramento River. All right, next slide. So in 2015, the city started taking concrete steps towards implementing that vision. Our first steps were small, attempting to tackle it in short segments using local funds. So first, the city started working on a locally funded project between Garcia Bend Park and Pocket Canal. Then in 2017, council gave direction to develop a separate locally funded project between Pocket Canal and Arabella Way. And these efforts made progress. However, as federal and state grant programs began to prioritize significant amount of funding for bike and pedestrian trails, we saw an opportunity to leverage our local funds to bring in more federal and state funds, which then lets us stretch our local funds farther. So in 2021, we were awarded the federal funds for environmental clearance, preliminary engineering, and final design for the full stretch in the pocket. And then we kicked that effort off. So we did lose some momentum with that change in strategy, but doing so allows us to have a cohesive planning, engagement, and design effort rather than piecemealing a bunch of different segments. So now I'll kick it over to Tim, who's going to walk us through what's happening with the project.
Thanks, Megan. My name is Tim Chamberlain. I'm project manager at Wood Rogers, and we are supporting the city, providing engineering and environmental services for this project. Over the last 2 years, we've developed a preliminary project design, evaluated potential access points for the trail, coordinated with regulatory agencies, and prepared environmental documents for the project. We're nearing completion of the preliminary design and environmental phase of the project, and we plan to ask City Council to approve advancing the project to complete a final design and coordinate with private property owners to obtain legal rights to construct and operate the trail. Throughout this process, we've been engaging with the community dating back to early 2023 when we had virtual meetings, very similar to this one, and a larger scale public meeting at Kennedy High School. Next slide. So just to familiarize you with the project location and the extent of the work, the total project limits are from Zacharias Park in the north to Garcia Bend Park at the southern extent. This exhibit shows the project in 2 segments, segment 1 on the northern side and segment 2 on the south. Both the northern and southern extent of the project would connect in with existing sections of the Sacramento River Parkway that have already been constructed. A key part of the preliminary design process was consideration for how to get pedestrians and cyclists from pocket neighborhoods up to the trail at the top of the levee. A large number of possible access point locations were identified initially. From that large number, next slide, please. The potential access points were reduced to 9 possible locations shortly after our public outreach efforts in 2023. These locations are shown on the slide and were further vetted using a range of evaluation criteria. This included consideration of impacts of private property, right-of-way requirements, earthwork feasibility, impacts to the environment, safety, specifically the ability for residents and law enforcement to view and take action at these locations, and finally, how well these access points would serve the community by providing easy access to the main trail. Also, part of this process was considering how neighborhoods to the east of Riverside Boulevard and Pocket Road would be able to safely cross the major arterial roadway on their way to accessing the levee trail. The red triangles show locations where additional pedestrian activated crossings were considered along Riverside Boulevard and Pocket Road in locations where we believe additional improvements were needed to provide that safe access. Next slide. Part of our public engagement included a survey requesting feedback about the trail project and potential access points. Over 1,000 responses were received, and of those, over 90% of respondents are in favor of the project, which will contribute to providing a complete levee trail connection from South Sacramento to downtown and connecting to the American River Bike Trail. Respondents also identified the top preferred access points at Zacharias Park, Sleepy River Way, and North Point Way. And I'll take a moment to mention Sleepy River Way is kind of an isolated access point in that it's not currently accessing a portion of the proposed trail project that we're proposing to construct, but rather would be improvements to an existing maintenance road, providing access to an existing paved trail segment at the very southern extent of the Pocket neighborhood. Next slide. Considering the range of evaluation criteria and response from the public, the project team has identified 5 access points which we are currently expecting will be included in the project. These are the obvious connections at Zacharias Park, along with the existing connection at Garcia Bend Park. Conversion of an existing maintenance access road to ADA accessible access point at North Point Way, a new access point at Audubon Circle, conversion of an informal concrete stairs levee access to ADA accessible access point at Country River Way, and conversion of an existing maintenance access road to ADA accessible access point at Sleepy River Way. This is, of course, in addition to the Garcia Bend Park access point, which I mentioned a moment ago. The project also includes construction of pedestrian activated traffic signals at Ashore Way, River Tree Way, and Sea Lion Court, which will provide enhanced access to the levee trail across Riverside Boulevard and Pocket Road. And with that, I will hand it back to Megan to give you some updates and info on the draft safety plan.
All right, great. Thanks, Tim. So when the city kicked off this effort, it was with recognition and understanding that the introduction of a public trail through what is currently a private space was generating concerns from residents. And so the project team was tasked with developing a safety plan to promote and maintain public safety. So to do this, we assembled an internal safety group to identify a plan of viable strategies to promote public safety along the parkway. And this included representatives from the Sacramento Police Department, the Fire Department, Park Rangers, the Parks Department, Public Works, and the Incident Management Team, which oversees homelessness response. The goal of this preliminary work was to develop a foundational understanding of roles, enforcement mechanisms, and initial ideas of implementable strategies as a draft, to be refined through input and feedback from the residents and community. And so this draft plan is ready to be shared, and it's available at the project webpage. So today we'll walk you through what's included in the draft safety plan to give you an overview. And then you're welcome to provide initial thoughts that you may have tonight, and then also to review and email any feedback to the email address. So the intention will be to finalize the safety plan as the final design and right-of-way proceeds. So the first page that you'll see in the safety plan is the introduction and background, and that's pretty self-explanatory. It gives a brief description of the parkway history and the project limits. It describes that the proposed project will introduce public access onto levees that are in part on private property, and that the purpose of this safety plan is to identify strategies to maintain public safety. The next page is kind of a table of contents. It describes how the plan is structured and organized. So the first part of the plan defines the roles and responsibilities of the entities that contribute to public safety on the trail. Next is a section that identifies the relevant codes, ordinances, and enforcement mechanisms for preventing and enforcing unauthorized activity from the parkway on public and private property. Third, the plan highlights safety strategies for the parkway that are planned to be implemented with the project design. And then finally, there's a section on optional strategies that homeowners may choose to implement. And the fact that the Levee Top Trail runs through areas in which the surrounding parcel is public property and on which it's public recreation easements on private property is important because the mechanisms for enforcement depend on whether it's private or public property. Next page. Okay, so then the next section outlines the entities who play a part in maintaining trail safety. And so that includes the park rangers, the Sacramento Police Department, the Incident Management Team, Department of Youth, Parks, and Community Enrichment, Public Works, and community members. And then the next section covers the mechanisms for preventing and removing unauthorized activity from the parkway. And so in the plan, it's structured kind of as fact sheets, and they cover the following information. It gives a description about the safety concern that's being discussed and whether that enforcement would be on private or public property. It documents the applicable codes or ordinances allowing for enforcement, and it outlines how to request assistance with information on who may request enforcement and how to do so. So the first section of this is focused on mechanisms to enforce public safety on public property. And so this includes the trails, parks, and where the parcel is owned by the city. The multi-use trail will be designated as parkway, which puts it in the parks category. And that allows for the setting of hours of use and enforcement of ordinances in city code that are relevant to parks. And those can be enforced by both park rangers and SAC PD. So this shows the relevant park ordinances that would be applicable to the parkway. Hours would be set, restricting use between dusk and dawn, although the after-hour restrictions do allow for people in transit to pass through. So if you're commuting by bike, and you're riding home and it's after dark, that's okay. You just have to have appropriate bike lighting. The ordinances also prohibit alcohol, smoking, possession of weapons, littering or dumping, starting or maintaining fires, motorized vehicles, and camping. And then the park signage will also direct users to stay on the trail. For any concerns about people violating these ordinances, here's the information about who and how to report. So who may call for enforcement on public property? Anyone. That includes homeowners, renters, neighbors, or trail users. For non-emergencies, they may submit requests through 311 or the 311 app. For emergencies, call 911, or there's a specific cell phone number for, or specific number if you're calling by cell phone. And then the next section of the plan covers mechanisms for enforcement of public safety on private property. Keeping in mind that illegal activity can always be called into 911 regardless, and that parks ordinances will still apply and be enforceable to the trail itself. These are mechanisms to address specific concerns on the private property along the slopes. So first is camping. In 2020, City Council adopted the Critical Infrastructure Ordinance, which identifies that levees, which includes the levee prism and a 25-foot offset, are established as critical infrastructure on which it is unlawful and a public safety concern for a person to camp, occupy camp facilities, use camp paraphernalia, or store personal property. So who may call for enforcement? Anyone. That includes residents or trail users who witness it. Enforcement can be requested by calling 311 or the 311 app. Removals may be enforced by the city following a 24-hour notice, but they can also be enforced immediately without prior notice if the violation poses a threat to public health or safety. And then pretty much all other nuisance concerns on private property are enforceable through trespass procedures. So this does require that the homeowners or the residents of the private property file the request for enforcement. And then the safety plan outlines the steps for the enforcement of trespass procedures in the document. So at this point, I'll hand it over to Noah to walk you through the safety strategies that the project is planning to implement.
Great. Thanks, Megan. A key component to the design of the project is utilizing SEPTED principles. And when considering this project, the SEPTED process, which stands for Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design, is really utilized to promote safety as the project is designed. SEPTED principles are not only used for infrastructure and public works projects, but they're utilized for essentially everything that you go to that has public space in it, whether it's an office building, the Golden One Center downtown. And to synthesize it, to break it down into very simple terms, it's essentially designing a space that doesn't allow for situations or unique spaces that would promote opportunities for someone to do something that they shouldn't do. Creating blind spots, creating dark caverns, creating spaces that you can't see is essentially what the SEPTED process is designed to stop from happening. And through that process, there are some key principles involved. One is natural surveillance. And that's really what I just said, designing spaces so that users can easily see and be seen. In this sense, the access ramps and trail alignments will be intentionally designed to have a clear, open sightline. And although lighting is not permitted on the levee crown itself, lighting will be installed at access points and nearby areas to improve visibility and safety after dark. Another SEPTED principle we're using is activity support. And what that essentially is public spaces become safer when they're actively used by residents, neighbors, and families. A well-used trail naturally will deter unwanted activity. When a space is filled with people recreating, walking their dogs, out with their kids, riding their bicycles, it's less likely to attract negative behavior. And our goal with this project is to create a space that encourages community presence throughout the day. This is an example of two access points that were considered during the initial analysis. And it's just to give you a sense of what a good SEPTED principle looks like versus a restricted SEPTED principle. The image on the left is Country River Way, and the location has clear lines of sight to the trail, from the trail, and on the street. There's presence of homes facing the trail. It definitely gives an impression that there's eyes on the trail at all times. And it is a straight line up the levee to the levee crown. The other location, which is at the sump station, that would connect to the Pocket Canal, and arguably is a great location to be able to connect, those on the interior corridor of the Pocket community, up to the levee crown. Unfortunately, has obstructed lines of sight and creates essentially a blind spot and has kind of a cavernous approach to trying to get onto the trail, and creates a pretty negative SEPTED process to consider. It was something that during the design process that the project team and SAC-PD's leadership looked at, and there were significant concerns about that. In addition to that, other safety strategies, that we have included in the safety plan include pods, which are recording cameras. Many of us, not all of us, understand what those are. The Pocket community and Greenhaven communities were the first neighborhoods to receive pods back in 2014. These cameras operate on a 24/7 basis. They're used by SAC-PD, and they have proven results. As many of us have heard from neighborhood meetings. They help deter crime, they assist with investigations, and they help identify issues like potentially stolen vehicles or unauthorized activity. The goal with the pods and utilization of the pods along the trail is it'll help balance privacy and public safety concerns using technology, and it'll allow for the utilization of technology in spaces where you need eyes on the street and you need to be able to keep an active monitoring. In addition to that, there are parking restrictions considered as part of the safety plan. In the 1997 Parkway Plan, the two major parking access points were designated at Garcia Bend and Zacharias Park. All other neighborhood ramps and pedestrians and bicycle-focused areas were not supposed to be open to the public for general vehicle parking. We're utilizing these tools to ensure that we can put red curbs at access points to preserve visibility, directional signage to steer people towards Garcia Bend and Zacharias if they would like to park their vehicle and then access and utilize the trail. And then also working with neighborhoods and neighbors in and around the access points to discuss time-restricted parking or residential-only parking permits. I know that it already exists on some of the potential access point locations like North Point Way. Parking restrictions will be reviewed, post-implementation, and we can adjust them, on resident feedback and on as needed basis. In addition to that, signage goes a long way. Conversations with users of the trail and other folks that have used the American River Parkway Trail, really teaching people, the common courtesies and trail etiquette are important issues. Some folks maybe have used a trail or use a trail regularly, maybe on a daily basis or several times a week. And some people may have never or very rarely ever used a trail and just don't know uh, simple trail etiquette, whether they're walking and where they should be walking, if they're riding their bicycle, how to notify somebody that they're coming up behind them, um, the leash rules for having their dogs, whether or not e-bikes, have certain speed guidelines and so forth. So enforcing and putting signage for trail etiquette is another safety strategy component that we've included to discuss. One of the frequent items that we heard, and we heard this at our public meetings, was the utilization of civilian trail patrols, like the American River Bike Patrol. The American River Bike Patrol is modeled after the National Ski Patrol program. And these are volunteers. They're trained in first aid and CPR. They do things like help perform basic bike repair if you got a flat tire and don't know how to repair it. And they really are serving as ambassadors, providing support, reporting issues, and just being visible eyes on the trail. Their presence really has been shown to reduce unwanted activity and improve user confidence when utilizing trails. Additionally, creating visual cues to limit access to space that might not be public, and teaching those that are using the trails where they should stay and where they should not go. Signage will be installed to clearly define trail boundaries, and to help reinforce what areas are public and private. In addition to that, utilizing trail posts as a fencing tool to coordinate and ensure that those folks don't access areas that aren't public areas. This will take coordination with our flood control agency partners, because it does require installing posts within the levee, and it's been an ongoing conversation with them. Lastly, this trail is designed and the access points are designed to accommodate and to ensure that emergency vehicle access and maintenance vehicles can get up on the levee quickly and safely. As many of us know, the trail is a great idea. It's a great community asset and community opportunity. But this is a levee for flood fighting purposes. And if there is a need for a fire truck or for any of our maintenance access vehicles, having a quick and easy way for them to access parts of the levee is critical. Lastly, what we have heard, and we heard this in conversations with one-on-one meetings that we've had with property owners along the alignment, as well as previous virtual meetings like this one, was what can homeowners do to ensure that their privacy is maintained. We are extremely cognizant that this project is a shift away from what folks are used to. And so taking into consideration supplemental lighting, lighting on your fences, additional landscaping, as well as signage to ensure that folks know that there is private property, and that trespassing isn't allowed on private property. Again, as Megan pointed out, this draft document is a starting point, and our goal is to now have conversations with those property owners along the alignment so that we can gain feedback from them and help improve this document and ensure that it's something that everybody feels adequately addresses concerns that have been raised that are reasonable while we've been designing and moving this project forward. Separately, project delivery and timeline. What we've been working on for the past several years is the design and the environmental clearance of this project. We hope to have completion of the environmental clearance in summer of 2025. As Megan mentioned, we have a public meeting scheduled on June 17th from 6 p.m. to 7:30. That's going to be at the John F. Kennedy Performing Arts Center. Everybody that's attended this meeting and any of the other meetings that we have your email address, and we will make sure that notifications are sent out with adequate time so folks can plan to attend that. And then our next steps are entering into final design and right-of-way, which will take between 12 and 24 months. And while all of this is ongoing, we're going to continue the outreach that we've been doing, working with our partners both internally, SAC PD, Fire, YPSI, the incident management team, park rangers, and also the community to really obtain good solid feedback and input on finalizing the safety plan through the final design and right-of-way process. And then lastly, we have to pursue federal and state funding opportunities to finish putting together funds to be able to construct the project. With that, I want to thank everybody for sitting through the presentation. And as mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, any questions that are involved, please put them in the Q&A. We're going to go through all of those and be able to answer all of your questions that we can accurately. If we can't answer your question this evening because we may not have an answer for it, we will look into it and make sure that we can respond and get back to you. And with that, I'm going to end the presentation slide, and then we will go through the Q&A.
All right. I think we're seeing a good number of questions. Many of them are in the Q&A section, although I am also seeing some that are in the general chat. So we'll definitely do our best to get to all of these. I think I'll work on the ones that are in the Q&A first and then circle back and make sure we get the ones that are in the chat as well. So just be patient and we'll do our best to make sure we get to every single question. All right. So I wanted to first touch on a question from Doug Colby, who asked, what are the designs of the Audubon Circle? Where along the parcel will it be located? And this is, I believe, referring to the access point that's planned at Audubon. So let me request to share, Noah, and I can bring up some graphics to show what that particular access point is going to look like. All right. Can you guys see my screen, Megan, Noah?
Yes.
All right, here. So this is preliminary engineering. So it is still at a somewhat early stage, but this gives a general idea of what this location would look like. Just to familiarize you guys with what you're looking at here, the lines at the very top are the main bike trail on top of the levee. Just off the top of the screen is Sacramento River, and then the Pocket neighborhood is here on the bottom side of this exhibit. So we'd have the access point coming down here along the street side at Audubon Circle. Each of these little hashed crossways are little resting spots to make this ramp up to the top of the levee ADA accessible. So a wheelchair could potentially roll up to a landing rest and then up to the next landing rest. And this is basically done in order to allow a steep enough slope for the ramp to be able to meet it in the distance that we have available. Doug, if you have additional questions that you feel like this exhibit didn't adequately address, then feel free to include a follow-up question and I'll try and get back to that if I can. All right. Next one is from Anonymous. It says, thank you for the info. It may be answered later, but I want to post my question while fresh in my brain. The introductory slides talk about access to waterways and site pass law. This will still not do that in terms of providing access to the waterway, I believe, or open up new waterway access. It's at the top of the levee. How will the city inform people assessing the trail that they do not have access to the river, only to the levee crown, or rather, will there be clear signage stating where there are public portions and private portions? I believe we covered most of this question later in the presentation. At least I hope we did to your satisfaction. But just to quickly recap, we do intend to have a pretty robust package of signage that will clearly define the public accessibility is intended to be on the top of the levee along the trail. And I think the references that Megan made to to access to waterways was more, in this case, more views of the water and being near to the river while using the trail. The intention, both from a public safety standpoint as well as protection of critical infrastructure, is to not have people going off of the top of the levee and down on the water side um, along the entirety of the project. Hopefully that answered your question. All right, moving to the next one from Mark. Let's see here. According to the safety plan, the city cannot obtain permitting for lighting on the levee. Why not? Can't lighting be included in the project permit? Megan, do you mind taking this one? I think you may have a better answer than I do.
So with regard, there's certain things that can be done with excavating into the levee. Things like running lighting along the levee is not something that's done. Also, the city does not have a policy to light trails as well because they are part of the parks. They have hours associated with them. So for both of those reasons, we wouldn't be able to put lighting along the trail.
I think there is a part of our plan to provide lighting at the access point,
yeah,
access point locations. And there are opportunities for residents to include additional privately owned lighting along their back fence or, in other means as they believe would best suit their own needs.
And we've got one that our adjacent property owner is also going to be included in the creation. My understanding that was that they would be stakeholder with true input. So I think this was in reference to the safety plan. And Mark, the answer to that question is yes. We needed to develop a document internally with our safety partners and partners internally within the city before we could actually go out and start having conversations with folks in the community. Now the goal is to go out and have the conversations with folks in the community to help build upon what's in this draft plan.
Yeah, it's definitely not intended to be considered final at this point. We've got a draft. We're presenting it to the public at this set of meetings. It's soliciting input, and through the next year, likely working with the community to make sure that the key issues that are important to you are addressed as best as they can be in this plan.
Next question is, can you walk after hours? Is that considered commuting?
This is certainly one loophole that you've thought of here. I think the intention here really is after hours is not for recreation. So if you are leaving work and returning home and you're using the trail, I don't think we can discriminate against people who would like to do that activity as walking. But certainly if there were times where this became a problem in terms of usage of a park, it's something that the city could certainly look into in terms of remedying. But I think the most typical use case for this is going to be someone who's truly commuting, using a bicycle and using the levee trail to go from work back to home.
And it's a enforcement mechanism. So if people were like loitering, it could be called in, they could be removed.
Just as with any other city park.
Yes.
Next one's an anonymous attendee. When speaking with a park ranger at Garcia Bend, he advised me that there are only 2 park rangers for all of Sacramento parks. Do you know if there are still 2 park rangers covering all parks in Sacramento? I think I can answer that one. Based on the conversations that we've had with the park rangers, there are more than 2 rangers. There are anywhere between 8 and 10 rangers out covering the parks in the city of Sacramento. There needs to be more rangers, as we all, I think, believe. But that is the amount that the ranger staff currently has with their patrols. So there are more than 2 park rangers for the entire city. Uh,
Next,
next one.
next question from Anonymous. Can I be cited for drinking on my own property? Certainly not. The intention here is that there's going to be a distinction between publicly accessed trail on top of the levee versus private property, which would be could potentially in some cases on either side of the trail, one leading down to the river or leading down on the land side to neighborhood backyards. I could potentially envision a scenario maybe where you'd be on your private property having a beverage, but also on the trail. That certainly isn't the intent to restrict that, but I can see a slight potential conflict there. Megan, do you have anything you want to add to that?
But I was just going to say, if you currently have private ownership out to the river, you will continue to have that. And the mechanisms for enforcement of that would be if you called to trespass yourself. So yeah, I think so long as you don't call the cops on yourself to request trespass assistance, you're probably okay. With the exception of being on top of the trail, which is going to be a public access easement.
Next question is, if somebody falls down the levee and is injured when they land on private property, how are we protected as protected legal exposure?
So I can speak to that with the caveat that I am not an attorney. But the state of California, in their desire to encourage property owners to provide, recreational access for the public, they established state code to provide protections for property owners. So the state code is section 846. And so that's a recreational access code that provides liability cover, or it protects against liabilities if you allow for public access easement on your property, if it provides protection for the property owner.
And just to clarify, Megan, that's civil code, right?
Civil code, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Next one is how can we have faith that the city will act promptly to deal with campers and other trespassers? This doesn't seem to be a priority for the city based on the American River Parkway or downtown. I'm happy to take a stab at that. So, if we look at the calls for service and you take a look at the paved trail from Garcia Bend down to the water tower, it's a good indication of what you can expect to see for completion between Zacharias and Garcia Bend. The amount of issues there seems to be based on calls for service, both through 311, SAC PD, and SAC Fire, to be minimal. And minimal in the sense that if you look at the unpaved section between Garcia Bend and Zacharias versus from Garcia Bend down to the water tower, there's less calls for service from all of those divisions. And there are responses regularly. Captain Shadashi, who's our new police captain for the Pocket Greenhaven area, couldn't make it to this meeting, but we'll have representatives hopefully at the public meeting in June. And really, if you have a concern that somebody is doing something they shouldn't be doing, calling the police department, calling for dispatch, and having someone requested to come out, they'll come out. It depends on what the priority of that call is, obviously, because the police department has to prioritize the calls that they respond to. And we've seen that, throughout the city. But they will act and respond promptly to concerns that are brought up.
And just adding on a little bit to there, the best indication about how the trail will be post-project is, like Noah mentioned, we have other trails to use as an example. And in talking with PD and with the incident management team, with the opening of the Del Rio Trail, there hasn't been an uptick in occurrences that they get called in for along that trail. and they don't anticipate seeing an uptick with this project.
Next question in the Q&A is from Mark. Older iterations of the Parkway plan had gone much further to mitigate safety concerns, specifically fencing on the crown of the levee for dozens of properties that abut the levee right up against the levee toe. They're barred from having vegetation and fences. Is there a way for the city to work with the flood control agencies to come to a solution for this?
So I think this is kind of a two-part answer. With regards to the older iterations of the Parkway plan, which showed things like fencing along the top of the levee, we would love to do that, but there are limitations on what we can get permitted through the flood control agency. And so that's where we're working with the flood control agency to kind of maximize what we will be allowed to do. So like those wood posts, originally, when we talked with them, they did not like the idea, but when we kind of reinforced what we're trying to accomplish with it, they agreed to work with us on that. So long as we can, maintain the access that they need to perform their flood duty responsibilities. So with regards, we will implement what we are feasibly able to implement. With regards to the requirements on the property owners with regards to like fencing and landscaping, we're happy to work with you and try to help act as liaisons to see where there's flexibility there that can be accommodated to with the flood control agencies.
I think that kind of answers John's question as well. John asked, would there be any leeway for building security fences within 10 feet of the levee? There's some residents that don't really have 10 feet to build such a fence. I think that goes back to what you just said, Megan.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Maybe we could take a quick interlude and answer some of the questions that were in the chat. I think this is about a good place to break in terms of trying to answer the questions in the order they were received.
Sounds good.
All right, so let's see here. Katie asks, there will be no natural surveillance from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. when people are not using the trail. How will homeowners be protected then? I think by and large, the broad answer here is essentially what's been mapped out in the safety plan is a self-reporting that, if there are incidences that it'll be people using the trail or in this case, at nighttime, it would be local property owners who would be relied upon to call in to law enforcement if there's an incident. Certainly 911 is going to be your best bet in an incident where there's an emergency or where there's illegal activity happening.
And certainly, any one strategy is not going to, be the one that applies to all areas at all times. Our approach is to identify as many strategies that we can to kind of layer together to just overall improve the safety of the trail.
Next question from Carlin. I hope I'm getting the names right. Some of them I think are cut off. Since this is a city project, is public art required? At this time, we do not have any public art included in the project. It certainly is not required. But I don't believe that there's anything that would preclude additions of public art either during the final design phase or at some later date. I know using an example in West Sacramento, the Riverwalk Trail, there has been an initiative to add public art in different locations along that trail, and that's certainly something the city may consider doing if there's grant funding or other opportunities to add that at a later time, but not with this project currently. And then follow-up question was, can you describe which areas are private? I can give a quick stab at this just to kind of give you a little more familiarity with what the private versus public is. I'm going to share my screen again, show an exhibit here. So this is a project parcel owner exhibit. The The yellow parcels are parcels that are essentially being touched by the trail project, which is shown here in red. And then the blue ones are adjacent properties that are sort of next to but not directly affected. Many of these larger properties here along the levee, especially in the southern portion of the project, are publicly owned, most of them by the city, although there are a few that are also owned by Safeco. And then as we get a little further north, there are some privately owned properties with single family residences on them, a couple of these in the southern area. And then if we get up here into the more northern segment of the project, you can see here every single one of these lots, or nearly every single one, is a privately owned residence with ownership all the way from street side to water side. And so part of the project is to obtain legal rights to construct and operate the trail on some of these privately owned properties. I hope that helped answer the question. All right. Next question from Katie. There's actually a few of them here from Katie. Try and get to each one. Will there be trash cans? Will there be dog bags? The part of the levee that is opened behind Zacharias Park is filled with dog feces. Certainly, this is a goal of the project to include a reasonable number of trash cans to accommodate dog walkers, to keep the trail clean, and to provide easy accessibility for users of the trail to deposit trash in appropriate receptacles. I believe we expect to have trash cans at every access point, and there should also be trash cans periodically along the trail itself.
And that's something that we'll be coordinating with the Parks Department as we work on the final design.
And then the third question, can outreach be done with much more lead time than a couple weeks next time, please? Noah, you want to take this one?
Sure. Typically, we try to give residents at least 2 weeks notice of our upcoming meetings. The next public meeting that we will be having, we've made sure that folks know about that on this call, which is, roughly more than a month away. So hopefully that's enough lead time for those that do want to attend the next meeting to have an opportunity to schedule that on their calendar.
All right, next question. This is from CB. There are currently signs and fences along the private levee, which people are ignoring to access the top of the levee. So public perception is that none of that property is private. I'm not sure if there's a question or if this is just a statement you wanted us to read. This has definitely been a challenge. I know, especially over the last few years in the context of the Army Corps construction project that went through couple years back, and then sort of some, challenges associated with where they're going to be putting the fences back in and then having them not be in and having signage up. And all I can say is that the city has really been doing its best to try and work with the property owners, work with the Central Valley Flood Protection Board and Department of Water Resources to provide the best services we can to protect private property owners' rights in the meantime. And certainly I know there's a lot of sort of misconception among various elements of the community in terms of not understanding that some of these properties are currently still private and feeling a sense of entitlement to have access along that current maintenance road. So this is definitely something we understand, and we're doing our best to sort of work through the various competing interests that are going on right now.
We'll kick back over to the Q&A. I think that was the final question in the chat.
Yep.
Next one is Maddie. If it takes 2 years for final design and right of way, how long will it actually take to build the trail?
I'll take a stab at that one. I think the goal is to have trail construction take no longer than 12 months. It I think probably the biggest element that's still somewhat of an unknown in terms of schedule is the city has obtained funding to construct segment one, which is the southern half of the project. But we're still searching for additional grant funding to pay for construction of the northern portion of the trail. So it's possible that there could be two different construction phases where first one portion of the trail would advance and then the second one would go forward at some later date. But if the project is constructed entirely as one construction phase, I think a 12-month construction period is likely a good estimate at this time.
And I know that the levee has been under construction a lot over the last couple of years. The construction for this project is really a lot simpler than the other projects. It's essentially just paving a trail on top of the levee. Where you have the access ramps, those will require a bit more grading work, but it would not likely be a long construction period.
It looks like Doug asked, will a trash receptacle be placed at access points? We've answered that question. Carl asked when the trail will be completed. We've answered that question. Commitment from agencies to mow weeds behind homes and not just visible street sections. I think I can take a stab at that. And there was a question just beneath that essentially said the same thing. We're working with the Department of Water Resources as one of our state partner agencies on this project, in addition to the Central Valley Flood Protection Board. The maintenance area 9, which is the maintenance area that is responsible for maintaining the levees, is the one that manages the weeds and mowing along the levees. So it is absolutely something that we can have a conversation with them about as we continue our discussions with them about this project, just to understand, what their practices are. I know some of the folks that are attending this webinar probably have relationships and have talked to some of the team, Casey London, those folks that do manage MA9 and appreciate the work that they do, but definitely hear what you're saying. Katie asked, I think this is the same question you asked in the chat. So
she probably just moved it from the chat to make sure we get answered. Yeah.
Mark, if someone is camping on private property, are they subject to 24-hour notice to vacate? Also, how will the police know what is public and private?
So they would be, once it's responded to, they'll be notified that they need to move, that they are on critical infrastructure and cannot be there. And they may start to move right away. The 24-hour window is when it's enforceable. So when they can physically be removed if they have not done so on their own accord. Go ahead, Noah.
Sorry, and to piggyback off of that, if somebody's camping on private property,
yeah,
you can trespass them and ask
Correct.
the police to remove them immediately because it's private property.
Private property. Thank you for the clarification. And then with regards to how the police know what is private and public, they said that because we asked the same question, and they said that they're very adept at looking up that information.
Anonymous question, for the private parcels, how will the owners be compensated for the use of their property?
Yeah, I can answer that one. So as we are approaching the end of the environmental and preliminary engineering phase, anticipated to be sort of transitioning into the next phase this summer, the next kind of big steps are preparing final design and the construction plans, and then also working with local property owners to obtain the legal rights to construct and maintain the trail. That process is pretty well defined for public agencies. It typically involves an initial appraisal of the property, an assessment of what the value of the land is and what the value of the proposed acquisition. In this case, it would be an easement for public access. There would be an initial offer made by the city, and then there's an open negotiation between the private resident and the city to essentially come to agreement, hopefully come to agreement on a fair and acceptable price. Typically, the appraisal is sort of the guiding starting point for what the valuation is going to be, and then that negotiation process can work from there. I'll also mention, and I think this is going to tie into some other questions that we've had previously and may come up later in this series of questions, but it's through that negotiation that there sometimes are opportunities for additional improvements to be paid for as part of the acquisition process. And that's especially a likely possibility when the improvements that are being asked for by the property owner are in direct coordination with the trail project, being needed as a result of that.
Tim, I think that kind of answers this question as well. Will the city be reimbursing homeowners for the costs they incur to make property safer? And will they be reimbursement for vandalism?
So definitely it's through that negotiation that if improvements are being requested by the property owner, that would be their opportunity to have those be paid for by the city through that negotiation process. For incidences of vandalism after the project has been approved and constructed, I believe those would fall on the local property owner and their personal insurance. On private property, excuse me. Anything on public property is maintenance of the city.
Next question is Alicia or Alicia. Are there plans to open the levee along Little Pocket? Why is Little Pocket not included in this plan? Megan, probably a good question for you.
Yeah, so there was the implementation plan that we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, and the Little Pocket is the next largest uncompleted segment there. Our task from City Council has been to focus on the big pocket first. It will be a policy and priority decision by City Council after this is done about when to look to have a project in the Little Pocket.
Next question is what's the status of the eminent domain compensation?
I think I'm reading ahead a little bit. I think I'm also going to read the next question as well and try and answer these two together.
Yep.
So the next question from Anonymous is, no one from the city of Sacramento has ever made an offer for purchasing recreational easement rights from private property owners. When will they be making offers, or do they plan to proceed with an eminent domain condemnation without ever making an actual offer? So I covered it a little bit in our prior answers, but just to sort of recap, we expect the right-of-way phase will begin in earnest, probably late summer timeframe, and will be continuing from then into 2026. Our goal is to have coordination with every single private property owner directly, and have a hopefully cordial and cooperative negotiation. We do not have plans to go directly to eminent domain, and that would only be used as a last resort if a property owner is completely unwilling to cooperate or unwilling to communicate with the city.
This is a carryover question. I think that was in the chat that Katie had about outreach. We answered that.
I have one more thing to add about the eminent domain question. Also wanted to add, even if a property goes to eminent domain, that doesn't mean that the property owner won't be compensated. It just is a more prescribed facilitation of the transfer of legal rights to that portion of property, and that typically the compensation would be dictated by fair market value.
Next question is from Doug Colby. He says, it looks like you're going to destroy my roses and Christmas trees. We got a problem. So Doug, that's why you're on this call, and that's why we're having this conversation with you. We will follow up via email, and if you'd like to set up some time for us to come out and take a look at your property and discuss the access point and coordinate with you, we can absolutely do so.
I'll also add that the design line work we're showing today is preliminary, and there is opportunities for us to make adjustments within reason. I think particularly for trying to save trees, or important landscaping. That's something that we can certainly look at and see if there's a way to provide provide the proposed project in a way that would meet your particular preferences.
Next question is from Yusin Wong. Hi, Yusin. Uh, he says, if I own property where an access point may go in and I do not want to sell my land for the access point, what are my options? And Houston, I don't know if you're referring to the property that you had for a while off of Benham, right there off of Riverbrook. But if that's the location, um, that's not included in the access points that are being discussed. But we will follow up with you via email and see if we can have a conversation about that.
Yeah, we prioritized locations where it's already publicly owned for our access point selections.
Yes.
I don't think we have any access points that would require full acquisition or relocation of any residential buildings or anything like that. So
Next one's from Don Murphy. The right-of-way access almost seems like an afterthought. Why has it not been done at the beginning of the project rather than at the end? Where will the funding come from if the city has to invoke eminent domain on private property owners?
I can take that question. So, as Megan mentioned earlier in the presentation, one of the key aspects that the city has been both fortunate to receive, but also is somewhat, frustrated by, is that we have received federal funding, and the federal funding, while it really gives us a head start in being able to pay for construction, it comes with a lot of strings. And part of that is following the federal guidance for completion of the environmental documents and for proceeding from that point to doing the right-of-way and negotiations and following the full acquisition process. And then if that fails, going to eminent domain. And so we are now basically at this point ending the environmental phase. I think we're very close to having federal approval on our environmental documents. It's been a long road, longer than I think Megan and I would have preferred. But we're optimistic that we're really getting close and that we can advance this next key step of final design and right-of-way negotiations.
The next question is from Tamara. Tamara asks,
Actually, before you go on, I think there was a second part of that question. Let me double check I didn't miss something here. Where will the funding come from? That was the part that I think I may not have answered. So, really related to my prior answer, the federal grant, as well as some city money that's been set aside for this project, has the necessary funding, at least for the first segment, to include compensation to private property owners for fair market value of the easement for public access. So that's essentially where the money will come from, and that's included in the total project cost that's currently being estimated. For the northern segment, we actually do have money set aside to pay for design and right-of-way, so that process can proceed forward, even if we don't get the money currently needed for construction. So all of that we expect to proceed forward in the next year. Go ahead,
the
Noah.
next question is you haven't addressed the access point at Riverbrook. Is the plan to close that access point? The city bought the land for access to the levee top for the large trucks used to upgrade the levee. I was up there today and the levee road, and there's still cross levee fences prohibiting access from Riverbrook to Wounded Warrior Park. When will the cross levee fences come down? And will you continue to allow residents who live along the levee to continue to harass and put up no trespassing signs to prevent access to the levee, as these residents believe they are the owners?
So I can take that one. So multi-part question. So I'll start with the first point. With regards to the access points, there's a bunch of existing access points along the levee. Our task was to pick which ones were going to be developed for ADA compliant access as like the kind of official neighborhood access points. And so we had gone through a pretty lengthy process to evaluate all of those different options based on several different criteria. And based on those criteria, we made the selections that were feasible, had really good SEPTED principles like clear sight lines, good public safety elements, and then also ones that could be, we wanted to have a nice uniform spread throughout the pocket so that residents don't have to walk too far to get to the access point, and make sure that there's safe, easy access for the residents to get there. It's not too circuitous. So we went through a process to define which ones would be the formal access points. We are not going to be closing the other ones. We just won't be upgrading all of them for ADA compliance as our official neighborhood access locations. With regards to the private ownership and the cross levee fences, so there are, I believe, about in the range of 70 properties where their legal description for where their property ends does extend out to the river. And so the property owners are correct that they have private ownership to the river, and the city and the cross levee fences are permitted through Central Valley Flood Protection Board. And so that process is legal, and our project will be purchasing the rights to put a public recreation trail on top of that levee, because right now those private parcels have flood control easements that are granted to the flood control agencies, but they don't have public access, public recreation easements. And so we'll be working to purchase those rights for those segments, and then the cross levee fences would be removed as part of our project.
Next one is a question about trash cans that we've already touched on. So got that one. We just discussed the access regarding chain link fences when they would be open. Mr. Colby, another question about trees and so forth. So as we mentioned, we'll follow up with you directly, and we can have an offline conversation about the proposed access point on Audubon. Marco asks, is the North Point Way access point going to be ADA accessible? The existing ramp is quite steep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, the answer is yes. Essentially, the plan is to take that current alignment that's really just a maintenance road for vehicle access up to the top of the levee and convert it into a paved, ADA accessible, wheelchair accessible access point that will be available for everyone.
Next question is will the city be offering compensation to homeowners as they have in the past? They've offered and paid. So I think we've answered that question in detail. Tim's covered that one.
The only thing I'll add is that only private property owners where there is proposed trail improvements occurring on their private property are the ones that will be worked with and coordinated with for financial compensation for obtaining the easement.
Next question is how much money will be needed to complete the project that is not already earmarked from federal and city funds?
I do not know that one off the top of my head. Megan, do you know?
Trying to pull up spreadsheets right now. I do not have the type of memory that can just remember numbers for all my projects. So,
maybe while you're looking for that, we'll grab the next
keep going.
question. Yeah.
Would we call the police or park rangers to remove people loitering on the trail after hours? Are there park rangers working in the middle of the night? So I can answer both of those. You would call the non-emergency police line to remove people in the park after hours, requesting them, letting them know that there's somebody, in the park after hours that's not supposed to be there, and it's a dusk to dawn policy ordinance. Park rangers typically do not work evenings. That's when SAC PD does pick up the responsibility for public safety calls for service in parks. Next one is, as a private property owner from the presentation, it seems we could have persons camping on our property for 24 hours before any response. That seems unreasonable. Who's liable for injury, so forth. Trespassing on our property we facilitated on this project. How could you enforce after hours community only rules? So I'm happy to chime in on this one, and Megan, probably kick it over to you. So if the interpretation was that people can camp on private property in this through this presentation, that's not it. That's not correct. If somebody is on your private property, they are trespassing, and you have the ability to have them removed by calling the police department and asking the police department to remove somebody that's on your property. If somebody is
24 hours was for the critical infrastructure, but you're kind of covered by two different ordinances, like Noah is mentioning.
yes,
The
uh,
24-hour rule would apply specifically to properties, especially like I think a lot of them were in the southern portion of the trail project where they're already city owned from side of levee to river. In those cases, if there was an incident of camping, then the city would follow its standard procedures, 24-hour notice, and then removal using appropriate law enforcement resources.
but again, to reiterate, if somebody is camping on private property, it would be the equivalent of somebody camping in your front yard. The police department would show up. I'm concerned that the public is currently ignoring signs and fences along the private levee under the impression that it is all public, so that are there any additional plans to correct the perception which is propagated by local newspapers? Um, it's something that as the outreach coordinator on this project and working with Megan and working with Tim, we definitely understand the concerns. We have posted on our project webpage. We have had conversations with local newspapers to ensure that we have been able to explain the city's position on this, and that areas which are privately owned as portions of the levee are not open for public access at this time, and we've been very clear about that. So we will continue to make that statement, and until the project is complete and all the right-of-way acquisition has taken place, the project is built, that is the position that the city will maintain. What are the ongoing risks that may continue to delay your schedule?
I think at this point, probably the biggest risks are going to be cooperation with private property owners through the negotiation process for obtaining right-of-way on top of the levee. We're optimistic that will go reasonably smoothly. There also are some opportunities for this project to be challenged legally. And so that is another risk that could delay the schedule if there is a legal challenge against the city's, effectively against the city for not, following the law and how they're pursuing the project. But with that being said, until those issues come up, we're going to continue to push forward and try our best to deliver this project efficiently.
The next question from an anonymous attendee. Since this is a park, can someone sit along the levee top trail for a prolonged period? Is there any way to make people move along if they're loitering during daylight hours? The answer is no. If somebody is using the parkway and they want to sit along the park, just as if they chose to sit down in a park at any point, they can do so. And that's kind of the point of the public property. So understand the concern,
Yeah,
understand the concern of somebody potentially looking down into the backyard. And I think that becomes, something that we can discuss as part of the safety plan and really, conversations with the community about this. But unfortunately, if it's during daylight hours and somebody's sitting down having lunch or hanging out, as long as they're not doing something illegal, they do have a right to sit there.
That being said, part of the purpose of having those wooden trail posts is to basically define where the intended public realm is, which would be on the trail. And especially for an active trail that has bicyclists riding by and a bunch of people, there won't really be convenient locations for people to like sit around and loiter.
How will private property owners be compensated for recreational easements? Tim, you've kind of already gone through this one. So Janet, I think we've covered that question.
I don't think we have any technical ability at this point to make estimates on pricing.
Not at all.
It'll just be through the typical government process for assessment and negotiation with individual property owners.
To answer Mark has a follow-up question to the walking one that he posed earlier. The reason I'm asking this is because the rangers told me that they cannot remove someone if they're walking up there walking and say I'm walking from point A. He said that occurs constantly. Loitering is different, but if someone is walking from point A to point B at 10 p.m., they're okay to do that, just like they currently can in parks. Also on that point, can you loiter on the levee top during daylight hours? I think we just covered that. I just sit up there and take in the sun and stare at my yard 15 feet away. So that being said, I think we've covered both of those questions. Mark said this is useful, thank you. If the flood control agencies are okay with the bollards, why can't there be posts with like solar lighting?
So this is where, getting questions like this are helpful for us. We'll continue to have conversations with the approval agencies, see what is viable. There is a trade-off with, we don't want people on the levee. So the question is would putting lighting encourage people to use the trail at night if we don't want them to? But it also improves visibility to see people. So it's kind of benefits and trade-offs there. But these are things that we can continue to have conversations on.
Next question. This one's an interesting one, so I don't think I will be able to probably answer this one, but will I be cited for open carrying legal firearms on my own property? Does the Parkway prohibition override my property rights? None of us are attorneys on this call, so I don't think any of us are comfortable answering that question. What is the specific amount of private properties that the city needs access rights to, and how much will that cost? Mark, I think we did cover that.
The total number of properties, I believe, is around 70
yeah.
private properties.
Yeah.
For the full extent from Zacharias to Garcia Bend Park.
Janet says, you're showing a photo of increased landscaping, and that's totally prohibited by the Flood Control Board. It's required for them to have visibility into our backyards in case of boils. Personally had to take out a cherry tree and other shrubs on my side of the fence. So it's to provide visibility. Wish you had a spokesperson for the flood board on this webinar. You're spreading misinformation with the suggestion. The intention is not to spread misinformation, Janet. The intention is to give folks some ideas of potential opportunities to address privacy. But obviously, we want to be able to work through our draft safety plan. In addition to working with our local partners, working with the state partners in the community as well. So your question is definitely noted, or your statement is questionably noted, and we'll make sure to take that in consideration. Since the public will walk off the trail and use the private levee benches, whether it is delineated or why wouldn't the city just extend their easement to the full portion of the property that we will know the public will access? So I think the question there is would the city consider the full levee as opposed to just the crown for the easement?
So I think when we get into the right-of-way negotiations, if the property owners want us to take more than we need, acquire more than we need, I think that is something that can be discussed. The trade-offs there is, if it's public property, then it takes away the ability to trespass people who are there. So, yeah.
From the conversations that we had in the last round of public meetings in 2023, we've had some feedback, that people might be interested in both of those options.
Mm-hmm.
And really, our goal at this point was not to assume a one size fits all type solution and sort of leave the option for those individual negotiations between the city and local property owners.
And I think this kind of piggybacks Tim and Megan just off what you
Mm-hmm.
said. Mark said, is there a reason why the city take the entire property from levee crown to the water so that property owners um, don't have to deal with any trespassing problems, and maybe the city can gain access to the water. So,
Yeah, we can definitely consider that on a case by case basis.
this question is there a way to make sure that 90% of the people that approved of this project in the community won't be held up by dozens of homeowners? Our goal as the project team is to see this project through. That's the task that the city has put upon this team. Part of that is making sure that we have conversations and listen to folks in the community and are able to address reasonable concerns that are brought up. And that's important. We're very aware that this is a project in people's backyards and don't want to minimize that or take that, any way other than, fully serious. So, that's the commitment from the project team.
And it really is worth mentioning that this is the city's, effort to implement a plan that goes all the way back to 1975. And that the efforts that we're doing now is not something that is new or that is, suddenly a different plan. It's really been the same levee top trail from, from Freeport all the way to downtown. And that's what we're trying to accomplish now. Is the trail dependent on any federal funds that may be cut by the current administration?
So that is the question that we are asking for almost all of our projects.
Yeah.
And every agency across the country is probably asking those same questions. The federal fund, we do have federal funds on the project. They don't fall under the discretionary umbrella that it's kind of nuanced terms, but there's an umbrella of federal funds that are more at risk. Those are the discretionary funds. We don't have those funds that are more at risk, but that being said, we're kind of in unpredictable times.
Next question is, what does the North Point access way or access ramp look like?
I'd be happy to show that. All right, this one is Audubon again. And let's see here. Audubon, there we go. This one is Sleepy River. Here's North Point Way. So very similar design, and worth mentioning this it's a little bit hard to see on the screen, I'm sure, especially for phone users, but just underneath here, a little bit lighter shade in the background here. Maybe I can zoom in a little bit. I beg your pardon. Okay, there we go. So here's the existing maintenance road that comes sort of steeply right up to the top of the levee. And this would kind of flatten it out a little bit. And again, providing those landings for ADA compliance, wheelchair landings. And I don't believe this one at this time, we don't expect it to need a retaining wall. So it would just be earth and fill to bring the trail up to the connection with the levee up here. I'll leave that up and we can move on to the next question.
Uh, we have stairs leading down to our land and river. Will they remain?
Yeah, currently, most of our project is generally right on top of the levee. And then other than where we have our proposed access ramps, our project limits don't really include modifying the side slopes. So we are not anticipating removing other access mechanisms.
Uh, what are you estimating for total right-of-way acquisition for both portions of the levee? I know it's not finalized, but what's your current estimate?
So I pulled it up, and I always hesitate to talk about, and I see a couple more questions about this. So I'll give my best to give an answer with the appropriate asterisks and caveats. It can be a little bit tough to really project out right of way costs before you get to the right of way phase because it's so dependent on appraisals, which we have not done. We're not legally allowed to start the appraisal process. So we kind of have um, ways to just, it's like spaghetti against the wall, doing our very best approximation so that we can start lining up funding. So right now, our spaghetti against the wall, not informed by appraisals, estimate is in the $8 million range for the full project limits.
Next question is from Mr. Colby, just thanking you for addressing questions. Look forward to seeing the precise location of the levee, access, and avoiding trees and roses. Hope to be the first to use the bike access. Good meeting. Please keep informed. So
And now I kind of want to see Mr. Colby's roses and trees, by the
there
way.
you go. Eleanor asked for the North Point access. Is vehicle access going to remain? If so, will the locked gates remain?
So vehicle access at that location will remain. It's definitely an important point of access for DWR and for the Central Valley Flood Protection Board to gain access to the levee for maintenance and for safety and other activities that they use. However, the locked gate will be removed and it'll remain open access to the public and for those agencies to use.
Mark has a question. At a community meeting, Dennis Rogers, Councilmember's Chief of Staff, indicated that people could walk down to the water from the levee once the parkway is completed. Is that accurate? Can they walk through private property to access the water for recreation purposes? I think there probably might be a bit of conflation with some of the statements there. I think likely what was being intended was there will be access, public access on public portions of the levee that you could then walk down to the water. If there is a recreation easement through private property, that's essentially private property on both sides, and the assumption would be that you wouldn't have access there. Anonymous attendee said you don't have estimate for right-of-way access, but earlier said the money set aside for right-of-way purchase. How much is set aside? Megan, I think you answered that question with kind of the budget number that you provided. Mark said in the 75 and 97 plans were also different. Please don't compare them apples to apples. 75 plan had a waterside trail and a fence on the levee crown to help mitigate privacy, as did the 97 plan. Also, 97 plan and 2010 bikeway master plan included bypass routes as viable alternatives. Okay. Last question is who were sent questionnaires in the survey sent? How many along the levee and how many elsewhere? I don't think they were sent to all bordering the levee. We live next to the levee and we're not sent a survey questionnaire. So their survey questionnaires were sent to folks that have previously attended meetings. In addition to that, it was shared with the council member's office for those folks that are signed up to receive his communication. And then anybody that has signed up through the city's general communications that live in district in the Pocket Greenhaven 95831 zip code. So it went out to about 11,000 residents, and we did get a pretty good response. Over 1,000 people did respond to that survey. And there were people that received it that live along the project alignment. and our property owners along the levee. We did receive feedback from them, but generally the response from the survey was positive. So I think that answers all of the questions we had. Mark, thanks for attending.
Thank you, everyone, for attending and for asking the
Yes.
questions.
I know we went over by quite a bit, so but we wanted to make sure we could set aside the time to answer all questions. We know it's important. And again, this meeting is recorded, so we will get this uploaded, very similar to what we've done with our past virtual meetings. And we do have a public meeting on June 17th. It's a Tuesday. Meeting will start at 6 p.m. We'll make sure that invitations and notifications are sent out so that folks do have an opportunity to plan their calendar. All right. Without any other questions, appreciate everyone's time and thank you again.
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone.
Have a great evening.
Take care.